native of Signal Mountain, Tennessee, Charles Maynard has had the Blue Ridge as the backdrop of his life, quite literally, and also in the sense of inspiring his own philosophical journey toward valuing nature and keeping alive a sense of place through the power of story. Charles is a graduate of Emory and Henry College in Virginia and the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta. He served United Methodist churches in the mountains of Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia for over 20 years. He is also an accomplished storyteller of traditional Appalachian tales and personal stories of growing up in the mountains, and a prolific writer, having authored or co-authored 29 books, including 21 children's books. Throughout his life, Charles has remained deeply committed to protecting the environment, especially his beloved Blue Ridge. He was the first executive director of Friends of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and currently serves on the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's Board of Directors, the Southeast Region Advisory Council of the National Park Association, and the Board of Discover Life in America. Charles has spent untold hours hiking the mountains and absorbing their history. For him, stepping over a Michaud's saxifrage blooming from a boulder is to recall the French botanist who scoured the Blue Ridge in the 1700s for new plants, and to also know that this particular rock type was formed more than 1 billion years ago. We are invited to be a part of this intimate relationship when reading Charles's book, The Blue Ridge, Ancient and Majestic, which is out front for you. Before I bring Charles up, I also wanted to recognize a special guest today, Jerry Greer, a longtime friend of the Southern Environmental Law Center, whose photographs grace the pages of this gorgeous book and whose photos appear in many of SELC's publications and on our website. So thank you, Jerry Greer. And now, please welcome Charles Maynard, the winner of the book category of this year's New Environmental Magazine.
I too want to thank the Southern Environmental Law Center for recognizing writing and encouraging people over the years through this Reed Award that we can continue to write about the places we love, the causes that are important to us. And I want to add my thanks, along with Kat's, to Jerry Greer, who has such incredible photographs that inspire. This is the first time, Kat, that this book has been described as Jerry's photographs with my writing. Usually it's my writing with Jerry's photographs, and that's okay, because they're certainly wonderful and beautiful as they tell their own story, and the story about the Blue Ridge Mountains. The Blue Ridge Mountains are immune from mountaintop removal because they are so ancient that there is no rock young enough to hold life forms in them for there to have been coal to begin with. And so the threats that come to the Blue Ridge come in more subtle ways and come in ways that are encroachment, that are falling from the air due to mountaintop removal somewhere else. And so the Blue Ridge, and the work that Jerry and I did together in this particular book, what we were trying to do is catch a moment in time in the story of these ancient mountains so that we could preserve what's here at this particular time. But also a moment so that others would know what we are losing if we don't take care, if we don't remain vigilant and try to take care of these ancient and beloved mountains. Years ago, when I was director at Friends of the Smokies, we had a meeting in Asheville. And Hugh Morton, the owner of the Grandfather Mountain Preserve, was there with us. We were in Mimi Cecil's home. The Cecils are the family that own the Biltmore. And we were in her home. The superintendent of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park was there, and Stephen Woody, a descendant of those who had lived in Appalachian Valley. We were discussing the greatest threats to Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And while we were there, Hugh Morton showed us a photograph. He said, with this photograph, we can fight air pollution. I was curious to know what the photograph was going to be. Hugh was a great photographer, and I'd seen some of his photographs. One was from Grandfather Mountain of the skyline of Charlotte. And it was taken on an incredibly clear day. And Hugh always argued you should be able to see Charlotte from Grandfather Mountain everywhere. So I thought that was going to be the photograph he pulled out, but he didn't. He pulled out a photograph of his carport. We all said, wow, Hugh, you're going to have to explain this one because this doesn't really move any of us to clean up the air. And he said, look at it closely. And he pointed to the top of the photograph, and there on the edge of his carport was a swallow's nest with 3 little heads poking up over it. It was a cute picture, but again, it didn't seem to address air quality. Then he moved his finger down the photograph to the floor underneath, the carport floor. And there were bird droppings all over the floor. And he looked me straight in the eye and said, Charles, even a bird knows not to crap in its own nest. He said, we've got to be smarter than a bird and know that we can't foul our own nest. We can't ruin the place that we live in. And it's an important picture for me. That all these pictures that we take, I still go back to Hugh Morton's carport and think about those birds. We have enough sense to not foul their own nest. We were walking on Mount Cameron, the eastern end of the Smokies Range. And it was a beautiful January day, a small group of people. But the western sky, there was a very distinct brown line. And above was this clear sky, and below it was just murk. And someone in the group said, what causes that? And before I could say anything else, one of the other people in the group said, you do. And there was a silence, and he said, you do. I do. Every time you flip the light switch, every time you drive somewhere, he began to talk about our involvement. The group wanted to talk about the Tennessee Valley Authority and how they were ruining the environment. But somebody in the group, again, pushed us back to say, TVA doesn't make electricity for nobody. TVA doesn't make electricity for itself. TVA makes electricity for me. And so ultimately, we have to realize that's where the problem lies. It's where the problem on Mountaintop Removal lies, is in the way I use electricity, the way I live, the desire to have a cheaper power source for the way that I do things. In thinking about our role and why we need to do this, I think about an old poem by Robert Frost. And since we celebrate writers today, I want to quote yet another poet, Robert Frost. He wrote this amazing poem that no one reads anymore called The Literate Farmer and the Planet Venus. Now the title alone should tell you why nobody reads it anymore. But it's a fascinating story poem, as many of Frost's narratives are. And in it, he tells the tale of walking along a ridge one evening and watching the sunset. And as it does, the evening star begins to shine first. And Frost, so taken with this scene, stops at the nearest farmhouse. The farmer and his family come to the door, surprised that anyone would be visiting, especially at this hour. And Frost says, I don't need anything. I just wanted to compliment you on what a fine sunset you put on for me tonight. And then Frost said, I'm particularly taken with that star. And the farmer says, oh, that ain't no star. Frost thinks, he's an intelligent man. He knows that it's a planet, not a star. But the farmer continued, that ain't no star, he says. That's one of those electric lights that Jersey guy Edison's working on. He runs it up so high in the west, fiddles with it for a while, and then brings it right back down so he can work on it some more. He'll do that for months, and then lay it aside to work on one of those other inventions, which, if you know the planet Venus, is exactly the way it behaves. Frost pressed him a little bit and said, are you sure about this? And he said, that Edison is going to help humanity move to its next evolutionary step. He said, Edison is going to get rid of night. He will help us become unbenighted so that it will be daylight all the time, which I think is frighteningly prophetic for something written in 1926. But Frost says, what could our next step be? And the farmer says, we humans will evolve to where we don't have to sleep. We can stay awake 24 hours a day. Think what a productive race we will become if we no longer have to sleep. And what I want you to hear is Frost's reply. He says, here come more stars to character the skies, and they, in the estimation of the wise, are to flash and spark, but not take away the precious dark. For we need the interruption of the night, to ease off tensions when overtight, to break our logic in too long a flight, and ask us if our premises are right. And I think that passage, for me, applies to more than the night sky, which is becoming more precious as we lose it. But I think it applies to the mountains, whether it's the Cumberlands or the Blue Ridge or any other range you want to speak of, or the valleys in between. We need the interruption of the landscape. We need that interruption to ease off tensions when overtight, to break our logic into long flight, and ask us if our premises are right. Thomas Jefferson, writing to a friend overseas, said that sitting at his home at Monticello and looking out at the Blue Ridge was like looking upon Eden. Franklin Roosevelt had a retreat in the Blue Ridge. We call it Camp David now, but Roosevelt called it Shangri-La, a place away from time and space. Carl Sandburg retired to the Blue Ridge and called his home Connemara. The first Spanish explorers that crossed the Blue Ridge into the Great Valley of the Tennessee, in their journals called it Tierra del Angeles, the land of the angels, paradise. It doesn't matter what we call this place. Eden, the land of the angels, Connemara, Shangri-La. For me, it's home.